It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Come January 20th, Donald Trump is poised to take power in Washington, D.C. And one thing that everyone is wondering about is what kind of economic policies will he implement that we should really worry about? Well, there's been one economist, Michael Hudson, who's been thinking hard and taking a close look at the economics profession and how it misleads the general public in favor of the top 1%. Michael Hudson joins us today to talk about his most recent book, J is for Junk Economics, a survivor's guide to economic vocabulary in an age of deception. Michael is a distinguished research professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Thanks, Michael, for joining us.
Good to be back in Baltimore.
So, Michael, your new book, J is for Junk Economics, actually is a sequel, if I may say, to this book, which is Killing the Host, How Financial Parasites and Debt Destroyed the Global Economy. And so give us a sense of your impetus for the new book.
Well, the Killing the Host was basically a historical narrative of how the financial sector rose to power and how it sought to take over government and resist the tendency to democratization by really restoring a financial oligarchy and rolling back what in Europe were the 1848 revolutions, the revolutions to sort of free economies from landlords, from monopolies, and from the banks. By the late 19th century, there was a counter-move in economics, and that move redefined the idea of free markets. When Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and even Marx wrote about free markets, they meant a market free of the idle rich, the idle landlords who collected land rent on a hereditary basis without working, with financiers and the bankers who then insisted that governments create monopolies to give them. The whole idea of industrial capitalism was to get free of all of these unnecessary costs. You don't need a landlord class to collect rent. You don't need monopoly rent. Around the late 19th century, the landlords fought back, and they claimed there's no such thing as unearned income. The whole essence of classical economics was to say there's a difference between value and price. Value is what it really costs to produce goods and services, and all that cost can be expressed in terms of what it costs to hire labor and keep it alive. Everything that's not a real cost is just a privilege. It's a legal right to put up a toll booth and extract rent. So Killing the Host was how this fight was waged politically, and essentially what's happened since Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan introduced neoliberalism that was followed up by the Clintons, by Tony Blair in England, by really the Europe today. Well, J is for Junk Economics is sort of two things. It describes how the economic vocabulary has been turned around in an Orwellian way to mean just the opposite of what words used to mean. A free market now means a market free for the landlords to charge whatever they want, free for the monopolists to charge whatever they want, free of any regulation. And the whole intent is to create what is called a methodology. I know that's a technical word, but to create a way of looking at the economy, of making national income statistics that make it appear as if, say, Goldman Sachs is productive, as if Donald Trump is productive, to make it appear that people who take money from the rest of the economy without working, without really providing any service, are actually contributing to GNP and to economic growth. So I'm trying to show that what people think is scientific economics, that makes it appear as if poverty is natural, that makes it appear as if Goldman Sachs and Donald Trump are job creators instead of job destroyers, is all logical. So I talk about the vocabulary. It's an A to Z vocabulary that goes over all of the concepts you need to pierce through this Orwellian rhetoric that passes for mainstream economics today. Mainstream economics is pretty much turned into junk economics. And its idea is that rent is perfectly natural to be paid, that a well-run economy should have no government at all, but should shift all the economic planning to Wall Street or the City of London or Paris or other financial centers. Let finance do the planning because they're the most productive people in the world, that government is just a bureaucracy. Now, this is just the opposite of what was believed 100 years ago. I think I've said before in this program that the first business school economics professor, the Wharton School of Economics at the University of Pennsylvania in the 19th century, was Simon Patten. And he defined public infrastructure, the public option, roads, as a fourth factor of production. The biggest capital investment in every country is what governments spend on roads, water and sewer, basic infrastructure, communications, telephones, natural resources, and of course land. All these things are being privatized now. And the job of, under government ownership, under a public option like public health in Europe, the whole idea is to lower the cost of living, lower the cost of doing business, so you make the economy more competitive. Well, under Thatcherism or Clintonism, or whatever you want to call it, the idea is to turn the sidewalks and over to the roads over to monopolists financed by Wall Street to all of a sudden begin charging. And the result is to make America a high-cost economy. So that when people like Donald Trump come in and say, we're going to make America great again, what he means is competitive again. But how can you make it competitive if you make Americans pay so much more in health care, as much in health care as an Asian would earn in an entire year? If you gave Americans all of their food and clothing and everything they buy and sell for nothing, they still couldn't compete because of all of the costs that other countries pay for through the government health care, government spending, government roads. This was the dream of America in the 19th century. It's what made America the most competitive country in the world, enabled it to undersell others. It what made Germany competitive, it's what made Japan competitive, and all of this is being undone now as if this whole world that existed before 1980, before Margaret Thatcher, before Ronald Reagan, even before Bill Clinton, didn't really exist. And there's been an expurgation of all of the tools of thought, all of the vocabulary that used to distinguish between profits that are actually earned on capital investment, hiring people, and economic rent, which is just a toll booth to extort money over and above the actual cost of production.
Now, you said something really important, which is that people, at least in this election cycle, started to believe that Donald Trump was a job creator rather than a job destroyer. What did you mean by that, and how have you been led down the garden path? I
didn't mean that they actually believe that he's a job creator. He wanted to convince them that he was a job creator. And it's true, he did create a lot of jobs, probably not as many jobs as were lost by people gambling at his resorts. And I teach at Kansas City, and they just had a study of why do people go bankrupt in Kansas City. Well, they have a ship that goes in the river that people can go and gamble on. And most of the people who gamble find themselves, they can't afford to pay the rent. They've lost the jobs. They think there's only one way that I'm going to be able to pay the rent and not be out in the street. I've got to pay 100-to-1 payoff. If I don't, it's that or nothing. So for them, it's actually rational. You know, I'm probably going to lose, but the only way that I can keep my head above water is to win the lottery. And apparently, you know, they end up losing the lottery. So Donald Trump's idea is if he can convince the working class that you can all be a millionaire, you're all going to win the lottery, wouldn't you like to be nice to millionaires for the time that you win the lottery? That's the game. Nice trick if you can pull it off. but I think it's a myth, and it's a myth that people want to, that leaders who represent Wall Street and the elites and the real estate interest want to promote in the hopes that somehow people will think of themselves, well, I could be a big capitalist. They're there, but for Donald Trump's father goes me, and I could do all that. But they really can't do that because the odds are stacked against them. And a good economic theory would show how the odds are stacked against people, why people are getting poorer and poorer since 2008. For the last 8 years, the entire Obama administration has been one downturn for the 95% of the population. All the growth has been at the top. We got to show them that.
Yet when we heard President Obama speaking at various rallies to support Clinton's candidacy, in terms of his own legacy, all he talked about is how much better off we are in terms of what he inherited in 2008, which is true. I mean...
No, that was a kiss of death. That's what lost the election for Hillary. Imagine Hillary going to the country and say, just think of how much better off you are than you were 8 years ago. Well, imagine what the people thought. Wait a minute, I'm not better off. I'm worse off. My real wages have gone. If you're 95 out of 100 Americans, your real wages have gone down. You're being squeezed by health care. Your housing costs are going up. All of your costs are going up, and your wages are not going down, and your working conditions are getting worse. I think the voters thought, I'm not better off at all. What is this? And their feeling was one of revolt. They said, they can't fool me anymore, no matter what the opposite is. We've got to throw them out. And even if we can't vote for someone good, at least we can keep throwing out the bad guys. And maybe like on a roulette wheel, a winning number is going to come up someday. Unfortunately, that's not how it works.
And so let's talk about the kind of mythologies that are being sold to the people, like the one I was just talking about in terms of President Obama on the campaign trail, telling people they're better off than they are. How are they being sold, these mythologies, and what are some of the terminologies that you cover in your book that leads people to believe what they're being told?
Well, one way that he convinces them they're better off, he says GDP, gross domestic product, is going up. And it's true. For the economy, gross domestic product actually has gone up since 2008. The problem is it's only gone up for 5% of the population, but it's gone up for so much for Wall Street, so much for 5% of the population that it's larger than the decline of the 95%. Now, I don't know if I've talked about this on the show before, but I was just in Germany at an archaeological conference, and we were talking about the Roman Empire turning into feudalism. And people said there's been a new economic approach, new economic archaeology. There really wasn't a dark age because it turns out we found so much luxury trade among the very rich, the landowners, despite the fact that the population was all being turned into serfs, the rich were doing quite fine. We find nice pottery. There was certainly money at the top of the pyramid, so much money that maybe there was actual growth. So they call the transition to serfdom and just peonage for the population actual growth because so much wealth was squeezed out at the top. Now, is that really growth or not? If President Obama and Hillary could convince people that GDP is up, and you haven't shared in it, something's wrong with you. This is blame the victim. She's blaming the victims for not participating in this growth that was enjoyed by Goldman Sachs and Wall Street and Chase Manhattan and the other bankers that were not thrown in jail. And most people didn't want to think of themselves as the victim, and they thought that Donald Trump's appeal was pretending that they weren't victims and that he was going to do something about them apart from making himself rich.
Right. And why is it that you blame the Obama period for this? Because he actually did inherit a terrible economy and a depression.
Yes. The reason he's so much worse than President Bush or even the President Clinton is this was a potential turning point. When you look at who are the great presidents in history, you really think, well, who was a president during a great war or doing a turning point? Obama promised hope and change, and but that was all demagogy. He didn't have any hope in change. The hope was for Wall Street. He delivered his constituency to his Wall Street backers. And instead of making a change, he turned the economy over to Wall Street. He turned the Treasury over to Robert Rubin and his Wall Street gang, who'd supported Bill Clinton, the most corrupt bank in the country, Citigroup, that Sheila Bair wanted to close down and turn into a public option. He turned over the Justice Department to Wall Street factotums like Eric Holder, who refused to put any of the crooked bankers in jail. So basically, he made it appear as if he was representing the people, where he slammed down hard on them, just as he slammed down on them in his work in Chicago.
All right, Michael, let's continue this discussion on your new book in our next segment.